In 1963, Edward Lorenz presented a hypothesis to the New York Academy of Science. His theory, stated simply, was that a butterfly could flap its wings and set molecules of air in motion, which would move other molecules of air, eventually creating a hurricane or tsunami on the other side of the world. Cause and effect. For every action, there is always a reaction. But what happens if instead of chaos and destruction, the reaction is a force for good?
Good evening. My name's Lambert, and I'm with the Boy Scouts of America. I'm going to move over here and get away from the mic. And I want to tell you about my moment, my butterfly effect. And it happened because of a college student just like you. See, back in 1976, I was a senior in high school. That was 1976, not 1876. I was a senior in high school, and I wanted to be an FBI agent.
Yeah.
Everybody back then wanted to be an FBI agent. I realized I had a big problem. I didn't have the right kind of hair. But I got chosen by my Boy Scout council to go represent the Boy Scouts of America in Washington, D.C. at the Eagle Scout Bicentennial Celebration in 1976. Pretty cool thing. I got the opportunity to work with the public, to work with a bunch of other Eagle Scouts. I stood at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and I used semaphore to communicate with kids, other Scouts across the reflecting pond in Washington, D.C. But that event, which was transformational in my life, that event was run by folks just like you. And you wonder about the butterfly effect. That event was run by folks just like you. And they sought me out and they said, do you know that you could have a lifetime career in changing lives? You could change lives. You could work for the Boy Scouts of America if you wanted. These were students enrolled in our program, the same programs that you're involved in today. And they worked with me for 2 weeks. They put their arms around me. I went back. I grew up outside of New York City. I went back. I went to my guidance counselor, like many of you did, and I said to him, I want to go to work for the Boy Scouts. And I'm going to go learn from this program, Nonprofit Leadership Alliance. And the guidance counselor said, you can't do that. I had to go figure it all out, put the schools together. I went and visited the schools. I settled at Salem College in West Virginia, one of the original schools in the program. There's a couple, there you go. And I got a degree back in the day in youth agency administration. In 1980, I began my career as an exploring executive in the city of Chicago. And I began to change lives because of what a few students did to make sure that I could go from this path where I was going to be an FBI agent to a career where I could change lives and impact communities. The message I want to leave with you is you can create that moment. Each one of you out there can create that moment in the life of someone else. And you can create that butterfly effect as you go on to change lives and impact communities.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Debbie Espinosa. I am with the YMCA in downtown Oakland. And I think the most critical moment in my nonprofit career happened in the mid-1990s when I was in college, but I was also doing a lot of work with Campfire Boys and Girls. At that point in time, I was on the Youth Advisory Cabinet and I was on the National Board of Directors for Campfire, because Campfire had a really strong belief that if you could take youth leaders and mentor them, that they could make a huge difference in changing the world. And so if you come back with me to the mid-1990s, there was a topic that people were really afraid to talk about. But Campfire empowered us to speak our minds and share our voices for the things that we felt most important. And the topic was, in the mid-1990s, HIV/AIDS education. So as part of our youth leadership training, we had youth leadership conferences every other year, and we selected a topic where we would have training and education around it in order for us to bring back to our local communities to be advocates for the things that we felt strongly and believed about. But it was in Washington, D.C. at American University at this youth leadership conference that our event that we did was 400 people strong, high school students and college students that attended the Youth Leadership Conference that year, closed down one street of the mall, and we marched from the Washington Memorial to the Lincoln Memorial, all holding candles. So if you can imagine, as late afternoon, the sun is setting, 400 strong walking down to the Lincoln Memorial. Our voices and the vision of us stating that there's something so important that we all need to learn. And we're going to show that to allow everybody to be aware that we are not afraid to be able to talk about something that at that point in time in our country, a lot of people were afraid to talk about because we knew the importance of it. So that night, at the end of our walk, we sat on the Lincoln Memorial steps, and every single person that night walked up to a podium and read the name of somebody that had passed away that year from HIV/AIDS, in honor of them, to help us know that we would have voices, to be able to let people know that there needs to be compassion, there needs to be education, that there needs to be understanding on something that not a lot of people were talking about. And then we took all of the training back to our communities and started teaching it ourselves. For me, that monumental moment of understanding what our voices collectively could do together, that it was irrelevant of how old you were or what the topic was. You have the ability to be able to use your voice so powerfully, that after that, HIV/AIDS education was starting to be taught in high school. And it wasn't just because of us. There were so many other people that were working with us in order to make sure that we could bring that to the schools. But to be part of that, to be able to really understand that you could be empowered to do things, and it's through nonprofit organizations, social sectors coming together and really talking about it and having open and honest conversations, that you could change the world. And I was hooked. I already knew that I wanted to go into the nonprofit world, but that is when I could understand the depth of what it was we could do individually and what it was that we could do collectively. And that was the butterfly effect that I could feel, not just myself, but 400 people strong that evening, and all of the things that have come from it. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is David Lefevre, and I'm excited to be here in Kansas City. I had graduated from Rockhurst University, and I helped plan this very conference 10 years ago in 2008. My moment of impact, that moment in time for me, was when I was 16. I went to a camp called Anytown. That camp, that organization in Kansas City, but I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, about 3 hours north of here. We went to some Omaha people. And I was at a camp that I thought I was just going to do canoeing, horseback riding, the regular camp things that you would do. But at that camp, we dug deeper into issues of racism, homophobia, sexism, and in that moment, I grew up in a white middle-class family, grew up on a block where everyone was Catholic. I didn't see anyone that was different than me. But in that moment and in that camp, sitting around that campfire every evening, my life was different. My life was very different. I realized there was such a thing called privilege, that I had privilege. I started using that word and understanding that others did not. And in that moment, I realized that there was injustice in our world, that there was inequity, that people did not have the same things that I had. And I was called at that program from that organization called Inclusive Communities. I was called to do this work. I then continued to volunteer, be involved with that organization, and then came to Rockhurst, was able to study nonprofit leadership studies, become a nonprofit professional. And then because I continued to be involved with that organization, I moved across the country, about 15 hours from Kansas City to Richmond, Virginia. I'd never been there before, knew no one, but started working at the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities and worked across the state leading education around equity, access, and inclusion. But that calling for me when I was 16 continued to remain relevant, to make sure that we were continuing to challenge others to think about what inclusion actually means, to actually think about equity, think about injustice. I've had the great pleasure of working for a variety of organizations that work with children, working with children who have been abused physically and both sexually, and standing up for them. And I feel like as a CMP, as a nonprofit professional, that's very important. But at first and foremost, I am an ally, I am an advocate for all of those who do not have a voice. So I think of every day, I think of that campfire, sitting around other high school students, thinking of that moment of time, that moment of impact that made me want to be a nonprofit professional.
Thank you. So, these three people are not extraordinary. Not in their lives, even now. Not extraordinary. Not their lives, not their experiences. Many of you can draw parallels to their own story, right? I can. I grew up in a middle-class American family, 2 hardworking parents who did all they could to keep us safe and healthy and without worry. I graduated from college. I got married. I left my hometown of Memphis, Tennessee, and I moved to Syracuse, New York. That was a move.
Nobody?
Anyone? It was a move. And, you know, I had a really difficult time finding a job. That's not unusual for recent college grads. You can hear those stories all the time, right? So I spent a lot of time in a very small apartment. And I was still unemployed at Christmas, so I went home to Memphis to spend time with my family. And it was my mother, give a shout out if you know Mama D, who with that southern, delicate, gentle voice said to me, "You have got to get off your butt and go do some volunteering." And so I did. I went back to Syracuse and I basically made a career of volunteering. But not in the way that you want to make a career of volunteering. I just worked a lot of places for free. I started volunteering 3 different places, and it was basically a full-time job at the end of the week. We paid a lot of money for parking, and I still just kept at it. And then all of a sudden I realized, this is a career. I can make a difference and I could make a living. So that's what I did. I had my moment, my epiphany, my realization that this is who I could be. I could have a butterfly effect. The butterfly effect, when I did good, it wasn't just one person or one family. When you provide food to a hungry family, those children who go to school with full bellies are changed. They are able to pay attention in school. They're able to graduate more frequently. They're more likely to get jobs at a fair wage, and they're able to provide for their families. So these 3 individuals on the stage with me tonight, they are not extraordinary. As far as I know, none of them can leap a tall building, but they most certainly are not ordinary either. Al, Debbie, and David all experienced a moment in time where they saw the world, both as it was with all its warts and flaws, but also as it could be. Ordinary people do not have that vision. They might see that the flaws exist, but they either assume that they can't do anything about it, they can't make a difference, or honestly, they just don't care. So no, these 3 leaders are great leaders in their own rights, not because of the positions they hold, but because each of them said, I know I can't do anything, but I can do something. And then they did. Hundreds of thousands of lives have been impacted because of these individuals. Do you feel that? Do you? The molecules in motion, beginning with each one of you. This is the butterfly effect. Instead of causing destruction, it's a tidal wave of good that will surely heal our world. So to each of you, I say, go. Add to our momentum and make the difference that will forever change our world. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Your story is just beautiful. Thank you.